Hello, everyone. Dr. Stevens again with a continuation of the lecture on form in poetry. This is Form in Poetry 2, continuing from Form in Poetry 1. And let me just remind you, what do we mean by form? Well, we mean the shape that content takes, where content refers to things like subject, theme, meaning, and so on. So form makes the abstract concrete, meaning that it simply takes the abstract idea and turns it into something that we can see, hear, taste, touch, and so on, smell, and whatever, okay? But when we're talking about poetry, we're talking about things that primarily can be seen and heard. So the elements of form, the main things that we discussed in the first part of this lecture were verse, beginning with the idea of line, and we discussed rhythm and meter, and we discussed rhyme, okay? And we're going to continue now with stanza. So let me scroll down here. We get to the stanza section, and we will look at what we mean by stanza. Here it is. Okay, what is a stanza then? Stanza, if you think of it in comparison with prose, is like a paragraph. So let's call it, for ease of definition, a verse paragraph. And what I mean here is it is simply a grouping of lines. And the shortest group that you can have, obviously, of lines is two. You can have 2 lines. You can have a 2-line paragraph, and or a 2-line stanza, rather. Let's call them stanzas. So it is a certain number of lines grouped together and then set apart from other groups of lines. What sets them apart on the page, when you are actually writing down a poem, what sets them apart is simply a break between the groups. So we've got a group here of 4 lines, okay? And then there's a break before we get to the other group of 4 lines. But that's not a very good example because that's 2 different poems, but I think you get the idea, okay? Now, in rhymed verse, stanza is usually of a fixed length. What do we mean by length here? Not the length of the line, but simply the number of lines in the stanza. The number of lines is going to remain the same from one stanza to the next. However, in free verse, all right, the stanzas are often of varying length, meaning you will have one group of lines, then you'll have that break in the page, and then you'll have a second group of lines, and so on. All right, so let's look at different kinds of stanzas. First of all, the quatrain. Okay, you know what a quarter is? 4, right? Quatrain then, 4 lines. A quatrain is a stanza of 4 lines. The Shakespearean sonnet then is made up of groups of 4 lines. And let's go back to our sonnet that we looked at in the first part of this lecture. That time of year when yellow leaves upon those boughs bear ruined choirs. 4 lines. And then a space, right? And then the next 4 lines, right? And then another space, right? And then a third group of 4 lines. 3 quatrains, but 2 lines here, all right? So a variation on what I said, that in rhymed in metrical poems and rhymed poems, they tend to be all the same length. Very often, there will be a variation, meaning that, and very often that variation in the length is at the end of the poem, where a poem such as this one here will end perhaps with a shorter stanza. So the Shakespearean sonnet then consists of 3 stanzas of 4 lines each, followed by a couplet, that is a stanza of 2 lines. So 3 quatrains and a couplet. Now, let me point out that very often a Shakespearean sonnet, and this will be true of other poems as well, will omit that break between the stanzas. Okay? And even the break here to the couplet at the end. So on the page, a sonnet might look like this, all 14 lines put together. How then do you know that they are in stanzas? Because of the groups of rhyme, okay? This first 4 lines are grouped in terms of rhymes A, B, A, and B, right? And then we move on to a different set of rhymes, C, D, C, D, and so on. So that is what identifies the stanzas, even if there isn't a break. But we're going to go back to our breaks here, just so I don't confuse you, all right? Stanza is going to be a clearly identified unit of a certain group of rhymed lines, a certain group of lines. All right, so we've got the quatrain. You will recognize this poem here, whose woods these are. I think I know. His house is in the village, though he will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. Okay. Familiar poem by Robert Frost, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. A poem that is written in quatrains, that is stanzas of 4 lines. Here is a very, very well-known hymn. Well, we don't often think of hymns or gospel songs as being poems, but they are. So, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. All right? A song, a hymn, a gospel song, if you will, that is written in groups of 4 lines, 4-line stanzas. Now, I want to look at something else about stanza structure, and this is, we very often find this in poems that are divided into quatrains, okay? Whose woods these are, I think I know, to watch his woods fill up with snow. Stanza, remember that concept, stanza number 1, okay? Now, how does the poem continue? My little horse must think it queer. Now, by the way, the word queer there does not mean gay, okay? This is queer in the other sense of odd or strange. To stop without a farm, is that one word? House near, beside the wood and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. Okay, that's the second stanza of the poem. Now, the point I'm making here, and what I want you to observe, is that very often stanzas will be linked in some way. Now, Frost is linking these stanzas in terms of rhyme sounds. Okay, no gives us our first rhyme sound, and that's A, right? And though gives us another A sound, doesn't it? But remember what we said about rhyme. Okay, our first rhyme sound is A, our second rhyme sound is B. Our second rhyme sound doesn't come until the third line, right? And it's the sound of hear, ear, right? And that's B. But notice that Frost then goes back to A. Okay, so our pattern is rhyme, rhyme, different rhyme, first rhyme, right? First rhyme, second rhyme, first rhyme. Going back to the first rhyme, A, B, A. Now, notice how he is linking the stanzas in terms of rhyme. Okay, remember when we talked in the first part about the Shakespeare sonnet, we saw that each group of 4 lines had a different rhyme sound or rhyme pattern. The rhyme sounds in each stanza then were different. But here, Frost is going back to one of those rhyme sounds in the first stanza, isn't he? And what sound is that, A or B? Okay, you should be able to figure this out. It's B. So he's linking stanza 2 to stanza 1 by rhyming the first line of stanza 2 with the second rhyme sound of stanza 1. But then, okay, now he's repeating the pattern too, right? The first 2 lines have the same rhyme. The third line has a different rhyme, and what is he doing here then? Okay, he's introducing the third rhyme sound, which is lake, right? Okay, and then he goes back again, adhering to that pattern, going back to the sound of the first 2 lines. So he is linking, right? Linking the stanzas together. And he does the same thing then with the third stanza, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harnessed bells a shake, right? That's the line that begins the third stanza and connects to the second stanza with shake, hearkening back in sound to lake. All right, moving along then, what do we call a stanza of 3 lines? A tercet. And here's an example. This is Shelley's West Wind, Ode to the West Wind, and it is written in stanzas of 3 lines. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, okay, first line. Second line, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. 3 lines. All right. Now, notice that Shelley is linking these stanzas together, all right, the same way that Frost was linking his stanzas by repeating key rhyme sounds. So what is Shelley doing? We've got A with being, B with dead, A again with fleeing, and then in the second stanza, B with red, and then with thou, we go on to a new rhyme. That would be our C rhyme, thou. All right? So what's the rhyme scheme? being dead, fleeing, ABA. Okay, and then red is B, and thou is C. So ABA, BCB, and then the second stanza is linked to the third with the ow sound, thou. And so low, okay, well, it's an approximation. And blow, right? And then until, right? Which is our D rhyme. Until is picked up with fill in the fourth stanza. And then, what do we do? Remember what I said about sometimes the stanza length will be changed at the end of a poem or at the end of a section of the poem in this case. So we go from 3 to a concluding couplet, and the concluding couplet then picks up again the middle rhyme of the preceding stanza with everywhere. Okay? And by the way, so everywhere here technically rhymes with here, even though you might hear a somewhat different sound between those two words. So a tercet, and in this case, interlocking stanzas of 3 lines. And when I say interlocking, I mean interlocked by the repetition of that middle rhyme sound, and this is called terza rima. Okay, Italian for a rhyme of 3 rhymes. Okay, that's particular kind of tercet is the terza rima. Terza rima simply being the interlocked tercets, interlocked in terms of rhyme. Couplet we've already looked at. Okay, 2 lines usually rhyming, such as at the end of a Shakespeare sonnet. Okay, we already saw that. Okay, or remember Mr. Pope? Pope wrote in rhyming couplets. All right, so if you watched the lecture on sound in poetry, you will remember this particular pair of lines. "'Tis not enough, no harshness gives offense. The sound must seem an echo of the sense." All right, offense rhymes with sense. You have a rhyming couplet then. Now, when the rhyming couplet is in iambic pentameter, remember that? It is called heroic couplet. Pope wrote virtually all of his poetry in heroic couplets. We'll be getting back to the heroic couplet toward the end of this lecture. But the heroic couplet then is rhymed iambic pentameter. That is iambic pentameter in rhyming couplets. "'Tis not enough, no harshness gives offense. The sound must seem an echo of the sense." Hear that iambic pentameter. Okay, iambs alternating unstressed and stressed. And when you've got 5 iambs, you've got iambic pentameter. All right, so we've looked at quatrain, and we've looked at tercet, we've looked at couplet, and so some other common stanzas, the sestet and the octave. Not quite as common as the quatrain, but you'll still find it. So sestet then is a stanza of 6 lines, and an octave is stanza of 8 lines. Okay, so examples. Poem by Yeats, and this is The Wild Swans at Cool. And just the first stanza here. The trees are in their autumn beauty. The woodland paths are dry. Under the October twilight, the water mirrors a still sky. Upon the brimming water among the stones are 59 swans. 6 lines, a sestet. Notice the rhyme. Okay, here we have A, beauty. Here we have B, water is not exactly the same as beauty, although it has what we call a feminine ending, meaning unstressed. So in that respect, it does beauty, water, meaning that it ends with an unstressed syllable. So that does hearken back to beauty. Mirrors a still sky. All right. And so that is our B rhyme. And then, so A, B, C, and this would be D. Stones and swans, in this case, comes very close to rhyming with stones. That is then our D rhyme. Now, let's see. We need to note something here about this stanza that I haven't mentioned yet. What I have said is that in metrical rhyming poetry, stanzas are generally all of the same length. So I believe in the Wild Swans at Cool, for example, there are 5 stanzas, each stanza having 6 lines, sestets, and then also the lines the stanzas, each stanza has the same rhyme pattern, not necessarily the same rhyme sounds, okay, but the same rhyme pattern. So getting back to stopping by woods at a snowy on a snowy evening, 4 4-line stanzas, each has the same rhyming pattern, except for the 4th stanza. I'm not going to go into that. Frost manages to conclude that poem by rhyming every line, okay? But so just take note of that. But generally speaking, all the stanzas will have the same rhyme pattern if, of course, we're talking about rhymed metrical verse. Now, the other thing I want to point out here that we haven't noted yet is that very often stanzas will vary in the length of the lines. So, line 1, the trees are in their autumn beauty, okay? That is a line of 4 stresses, okay? Now, the woodland paths are dry. You should be able to hear that that line is shorter. 3 stresses. The woodland paths are dry. Okay, and this one, under the October twilight, the water. Okay, that is an iambic pentameter line. Under the October twilight, the water. I'm sorry, 4 stresses, back to 4 stresses. What am I talking about? Okay. Mirrors, a still sky, 3 stresses again. And then here's where Yeats goes into his 5 stress line, his iambic pentameter. Upon the brimming water among the stones are 59 swans. Okay, now there are different ways that we could measure the length of a line. But in metrical verse, the primary unit of measure is the stress. So you can see here the pattern of length in Yeats's stanzas: 4-3, 4-3, 5-3. Okay? All right. I'm going to conclude by talking just a little bit about the rationale behind stanzas. All right? Sound and sense. First of all, organizing the poem into units of content or meaning. Let's look at back to the Shakespeare sonnet as an example. Notice how the poem is structured. First of all, it's structured in terms of seeing, behold. Okay? Behold is to look at, right? To see. So the speaker is talking to someone, and he's asking that someone to see him. Okay? Again, second stanza, see. Third stanza, see. Okay, this is, an earlier form of the verb see, but it still means the same thing. Okay, we would say, in me you see the twilight, okay, and thou, in me thou seest, but no reason to be confused about that. This thou perceivest, okay, perception being another form of seeing. So 4 times the speaker is telling the person he's talking to about seeing. You can see me this way, you can see me this other way, and so you see me, okay? You see all of this, and it makes your love more strong. So finally at the end we see that he is talking to someone who loves him. All right, but there are 3 different forms of seeing. The first form of seeing is seeing in terms of yellow leaves and boughs shaking against the cold, right? And ruined choirs where late the sweet bird sang. Well, recently. Late means recently here, okay? So first stanza, seeing in terms of the autumn of the year. All right, so that's one topic. All right, but second stanza goes into a different topic. The topic being twilight, okay? The time immediately after sunset. After sunset fadeth in the west. And then the third stanza, all right, still talking about what you will see in me. You will see in me the autumn of the year. You will see in me the light after sunset. You will see in me the glowing of a fire, and so on. All right, organizing the sonnet then in terms of 3 different aspects of one subject. And the subject in this case being, as I indicated, I believe it was in part 1 of this lecture, the phenomenon of growing old. And then what happens at the end? Okay, the concluding couplet is different. The concluding couplet then provides a conclusion. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well, which thou must leave ere long. Okay? Because you see that I am growing old, because you see all of these things in me, all right, then you are going to love me more strongly. So that's one reason for the stanza. One rationale is that we organize according to topic. We organize according to meaning and so on. All right, so we're organizing the poem into units of content or meaning. And then we also are organizing into units of sound, because each stanza then has its own unique sound, created not only by rhythm, but also by rhyme. That sound closes off that particular unit, that particular stanza as a unit of sound as well as a unit of meaning. Perhaps the most obvious example then is the heroic couplet. Okay, again, well, let's go back up to Mr. Pope. The heroic couplet closes off because of these end rhymes. Okay, because of these end rhymes, the sound closes off the unit of meaning. You see, and then Pope goes on to. We don't have time to go on to different. I mean, he obviously follows this with other heroic couplets, right? This is not a poem in itself. But then what happens is that the sound closes off the meaning of each couplet. Then we go on to a different meaning or a different content, different topic, right? Okay. We need to end then, because I'm already over my 30-minute limit. We need to end by talking about this aspect of form, and that is length. This is one of the things that defines a lyric poem. In contrast with the other genres of poetry, of literature, okay? Lyric poems are short, relatively. Okay? And meaning in comparison with plays, that is drama, and fiction, that is short stories and novels. And so just to give you a couple of examples, you've got very short poems, such as Sarah Cleghorn's The Golf Links Lie So Near the Mill. This is a quatrain, right? It's a quatrain. It's the entire poem. A longer poem, Birches, 59 lines long, and yet your lyric poem is always short enough, or we could say never too long, to encompass one topic with one theme. All right. So, again, as always, thank you for listening, folks. I look forward to reading what you have to say about form in our online discussion.